So I wanted to make a video to talk about mulberries and how to manage a mulberry and where does the fruit actually form and how does it fruit? Because this is questions that I couldn't really find myself in terms of how to prune it so I can manage the size of the tree, but I'm also not going to inhibit the production of fruit. So in front of me here, this is a 3-year-old or a little less than 3-year-old Shangri La mulberry. You can see the tree is about maybe 3.5 inches at the very base. There was a big codominant lead that I cut out a couple of months ago. But the tree's probably at least 10 feet tall right now and it's growing very vigorously. So here's the thing to know about mulberries. Mulberries fruit on the 1-year-old growth. So what that means, after this tree fruited in the spring, this was one of the spots where I pruned back an old limb, an old branch right here. I cut it right there in the end of April. So everything here that's grown out has new growth that has grown since April. It's now the middle of July here. So all of this growth right here that's grown since April is where my fruit set next February and March is going to happen. These buds right here, this leaf is going to fall off, and when this bud breaks, it's going to come out with flowers on it and set fruit. And then new growth, a new branch may or may not form from there, but for sure new leaves and flowers. So with a mulberry, mulberries are not terminal bloomers, right? So when you're gonna prune a mulberry, I'll see a lot of things that says, oh, cut it back real hard when the tree is dormant and let it flush out because it comes on the new growth. The mulberries form on the new growth. Well, they do form on new growth, sort of, but they form on the newly opened buds, last year's buds. Some will flush out on brand new growth, but your heaviest fruit set is going to be off of this 1-year-old wood. So it's July now. This wood is growing right here. In the springtime next year, the fruit is going to come off of these buds that are setting right now. And you can see if you come back, this was the cut that was made this spring. This was last year's growth. These buds aren't going to break. There's a lot of buds here, but these buds aren't going to flower. Maybe some of these, you'll especially have these little spurs and stuff, like these will flower. And occasionally one can break open, but what you want to do is manage the tree for the 1-year-old wood. So again, I let it grow to a point where I'm getting lots of nice 1-year-old shoots. Now the 1-year-old wood won't flower if it gets thick enough, maybe thicker than your pinky, maybe a little more. Those buds start to harden up and they won't really break. Like if it's wood like this thick here, this will break and flower for you. Now if it's more like this sized wood here, these probably aren't going to break. This is this year's growth right here. There was a cut made here, and this is this year's growth. It's probably 6-foot long branch right now, has grown this year. But this one will set a lot of fruit out in the end, but it won't set fruit down here, even though this is 1-year-old wood. So you want to make it so there's enough. If I back up, the tree has a lot of vigorous whip like one, current season's growth. Now, this variety, it doesn't like to branch very much. Like if you tip back a branch, it will probably just crack one more bud open. So what will happen is that everything below where you cut will typically kind of harden up and won't set fruit below where you cut. Generally speaking, some will, but for the most part, if I were to cut this branch, it may break 2 buds, but there's a good chance it'll just start from wherever I cut, and those new buds that grow from there, the new growth, one bud will break and a new branch will start to come out, and those new buds will set fruit. But so you got to kind of figure out the tree. Like this tree, these branches, what I do with this is a Shangri La. This tree wants to grow, the branches want to go straight up. Like a lot of like this branch right here, if I stand back, a lot of these upper branches, they would be going straight up and they would be probably 5 or 6 feet taller than they are now. But what I'm doing is bending them back. So what I do is I come in here and I physically just kind of bend it like this and pull it down. And sometimes you got to really get in there and like bend it. You can see how these are bent. And what I'm doing is getting the tree to flatten out. So what happens if you get a branch going up with certain varieties, they'll get these super vigorous branches that will go straight up for the sky, and they'll sap all the vigor out of the rest of the tree. And you'll get big wood that's that thick in 1 year, but it doesn't really set fruit. That wood that's going straight up and down doesn't really fruit for you very well. So this variety, what I'm trying to do is flatten it out and get a lot of these nice horizontal laterals that are 1 year old wood. So in the springtime, I pruned this tree back hard. I pruned all the foliage off of it. I pruned every branch on the tree. So it's got a pretty nice shape right now. But you can see my cuts that I made here. It's almost actually kind of hard to see them. There was a big one here and 2 branches came out. I headed back a big branch that grew up 6 feet at least. I got 2 branches out of that. Headed off a big one here, and I got 1 big long branch out of that. You can see I headed 1 back here, and I got 2. Headed 1 back here, and I got a spur and another branch here. And like here, headed it back, it split into 2. Here again, headed it back, I got 3 buds to break off of this, which is ideal. So now, where there was 1 branch with 10 buds coming out of it, head it back, now there's 3 branches with 10 or 15 buds on them a piece. Now if I come and head it back again, I could break, these 3 branches could break 2 buds a piece, and there could be 6 branches where there used to be 1. So the idea is to make as much 1 year old wood by the end of the growing season, to have break as many buds during the growing season as possible, and get it to harden as many buds as it can by the end of the growing season. Because come the next growing season, and like a lot of these little spurs like this, these will set fruit for you. So you want to get the tree to break as many buds. And if we walk over here, I apologize for the shaky camera. I don't have my gimbal. But we'll go look at a different variety that I have to manage a little bit differently. A lot of mosquitoes out tonight. So this other variety that's in my front yard is a Tice mulberry that I grew from a cutting. It was just a little whip last year. This tree is 1 year old. So this Tice variety is super, super vigorous. It's very vigorous. And you can see it has these huge leaves on it. It's a very, very vigorous grower with a big, really good berry. So this tree has a very different growth habit than the one we were just looking at. This tree does not grow vertically the same way as that other one. It grows more kind of lateral, wide open, side to side. So this tree, what I'll do with this one is I'll tip it. I'll keep tipping, 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 and see, like, all of these branches. See, I tipped this one just a week ago, and if you look at it, I tipped it back to a double bud right there. This variety does this thing where it'll put these two buds side by side. And if I'm lucky, I'll get this bud and maybe one back here. There's another double right here. I'll break at 3 buds here. Like some of these here, you can tell where I tipped it, I broke 2 buds. So now there was one branch that looked like this here before. Now I tipped that branch back. Now I've got 2. These are gonna set fruit in the springtime. So it's a double thing, once for the management of the size, and 2, to create fruiting buds, to break more buds, because that's what you want to do. You want as much of, by the end of the growing season, you want a bunch of wood like this right here, about this size. If you can crack open as many buds during the growing season when the tree's growing vigorously by tipping all of these back and breaking new buds below it, you'll end up with this tree that's real bushy and has a ton of 1-year-old hardened up wood at the end of the growing season. So all of those are going to break open and flower. So this specific variety, this Tice, this one hardly goes dormant at all. Like, this tree didn't even really lose its leaves last winter, and we had multiple nights in the 30s here in Riverview. I don't know why, but it's just, this variety is like that. And it's a really good, it is a very, very good mulberry. So like I said, this tree has a little bit different habit. If I were to tip back that Shangri La, it will just break 1 bud. This tree is pretty good at, like you can see here in the past, I cut it here, and I got a bud break here and here and here. So I got 3 to come off of that. And so what I'll do is I'll come back and tip it again. Tipped it back here. So maybe I'll get 2 or 3 to break there. Sometimes though, that you'll head it back and just 1 will break. But if you can head it back and double it, you can head the thing back and continue to, and as long as you do it early enough in the growing season, particularly here in Florida, you're gonna get a bunch of growth. Like these trees, all of my mulberries, they don't really stop growing until sometime around Thanksgiving is when they'll kind of sort of stop the vegetative growth. This one here is called a Florida Giant, is the variety. And this is kind of the same deal. Like I'll tip this one and you can see that bud swelling up, but the one below it's not really doing anything. So I just headed it back to keep it more under control from a size standpoint. But this one will, like you can see here, excuse me, cut it, prune it back. I had a bud, the bud that I cut back to broke, as well as the one behind it. So I tip it back, I can break more buds. And that's what I want to do. I want to break as many buds as I possibly can during the growing season and let them harden up. Because I can have as many branches as I can, which means more buds, which means more fruit. And my tree will end up a little bit smaller. Now, if you let a mulberry just grow and grow and grow, You'll end up with a tree that makes a ton of fruit. Don't get me wrong. A completely unpruned mulberry that grows to its mature size eventually will just mature enough wood in its canopy to where you'll have more fruit than you can pick or eat. But if the trees will get huge, like this Tice variety, this tree's only a year and a half old, or a year old, I think. I took the wood last spring. I took the cutting. So, you know, that's how big it is in 1 year. So the mature trees here get huge. So hopefully that explains a little bit more clearly about mulberry pruning and where the actual fruit set comes from. So check it out.